talk about leadership contradictions. So let's jump straight into it and talk about Trump. Yep, controversial topic, I know. And yes, someone who himself seems to be a walking contradiction. If you look at any of his comments, any of the stuff that he goes through, you can find a lot of contradictions, and it just seems to be his personality. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because we're going to be talking about him in another segment as well. And so I think we'll talk about that part then. But right now, we're not necessarily going to talk about Trump. We're going to talk about Trump's trial, right? The Trump trial. Now, I to be honest, I've lost count or lost track of which trial this is that they're talking about, because he's got so many different trials on at the moment. Like I thought he's just under trial, but he's not. He's in different states. He's under trial for different things. It's crazy. I don't quite get it all, but a story came out that one of the judges that is hearing his case says that there is a judge that has been donating to stop Trump campaigns, right? To organizations and people that are against Trump and trying to stop Trump in everything that he's doing. This judge has been found to be financially supporting those organizations. And now he's residing over this court case. Dr. Rod, is that a contradiction? Is that a conflict of interest? Like I know that obviously in a legal sense, yeah, okay, the legal sense, it can be a bit of an issue. But in general as well, is this right?
Absolutely not. Very clear conflict of interest. If it's not an actual conflict of interest, certainly potential and perceived as well. And the only right course of action is for Judge Sarah Wallace to recuse herself from hearing the matter. Cut and dried, absolutely no room for debate whatsoever.
Okay, great. Well, that's this segment done. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, but the big issue, of course, is why does it happen in America? Why is it happening? And in particular, why does it happen for President Trump? And that's because the justice system is being used for political purposes. That is wrong. Cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever.
So obviously, in a court case, the judge has to swear themselves in to be impartial, right? And so how can...
Well, justice requires it. See, our system of justice actually requires it. The judge has got to be objective. And look, nobody can be totally objective, of course. That's an utter impossibility, and that's why juries exist. Yep. I'm not sure whether there's a jury involved in this particular case because I'm not aware of the full details of it, but what it's all about is trying to stop Donald Trump being considered in the primaries votes, and there are a number of states that are taking action.
Yep.
And this particular judge has clearly got a conflict of interest. Look, there's just no doubt about it. And, she says, I think she said in response, no, I can be objective. So it doesn't matter if she thinks she can be objective or not. Other people don't. And therefore, there's at least a perceived conflict of interest. There's definitely a potential conflict of interest. And there may well be an actual conflict which she's not prepared to disclose.
Yep.
Or she's not self-aware enough to believe that that's the case. So, look, she just shouldn't be hearing it. It's pure and simple.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about a judge, and it's like, yeah, that's great. Let's talk about leaders, because obviously we wanted to use this as a metaphor for leaders. Obviously, we as leaders all have our own opinions. We all have our own side of the aisle that we sit on, whether we're red or blue. We all have our opinions on certain aspects in religion, on business, on politics. We all kind of sit on either side. Is it important for a leader of an organization, a leader of well, actually in politics, maybe they shouldn't be impartial if they're leading in politics, but leading in all different areas of life, whether it be entertainment, media, like whatever. is it important when you're leading an organization that you remain impartial?
Not necessarily, and I think often it's impossible. That's why we have this concept of conflict of interest. So if you're in a leadership position and a decision is being made that is going to affect you personally, or someone who's a member of your family or a close friend, and there will be a benefit accruing to yourself or your family or a close friend or an organisation with which you've got some kind of relationship, be that financial or other, then I think you should declare the conflict of interest and count yourself out of the final decision-making process. That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't have the opportunity to say something. And look, that's general practice in boards when we're dealing with conflict of interest. You declare the conflict, and then your fellow directors, or if we're talking about a leadership team, the leadership team should make a decision as to whether or not you're going to be able to vote on the issue, whether or not you're going to be able to speak on the issue but not vote, whether or not you're going to be able to be present, not speak, not vote, or whether you've got to remove yourself from the discussion physically. And we should be having those kinds of discussions on a regular basis. It's particularly difficult, I think, in the corporate world, particularly with large publicly owned organisations.
Yeah.
And this is where boards need to be very, very diligent in scrutinising decisions that are being made by the senior management to ensure that senior management is not taking risk, which is actually borne by the shareholders or the employees rather than themselves. And I think there are one or two cases that we're observing in Australia right now that fit that category. It's a difficult thing, but I think leaders need to be scrupulous in this area. And it really does help if you're a Christian and you understand that God is your provider and your protector. It's okay to admit to a conflict of interest because God is going to look after you anyway. So you don't have to look after yourself through the decisions that are being made in your leadership team.
That's really good. I want to take a shift from the board and then talk about leading individuals, right? Because look, when you obviously been involved in a lot of Christian organizations and stuff, it's much easier to be able to lead someone that does have the same views as you. But a lot of leaders don't have that luxury. A lot of leaders are leading people that have very opposing political views, very, very opposing religious views, very opposing views on just everyday life. And you actually see that disparity because there is actually a number, there is a difference between leadership level people and workers. And sometimes there's a big class difference. And so there's obviously going to be, very different views on things. So I actually see a challenge with leading someone through, going back to this story about this judge that has a strong opinion, says she's going to be impartial, but let's be honest, she's going to be leading from this very strong point and then making this impact on a person she's leading, which is Trump. So, kind of leading because she's in control of his destiny at the moment. But when we're leading people, I feel I suppose what I want to try to discuss is how do we lead someone by still having, obviously leading from our value systems and leading from our point of views and our experience, etc., but leading someone that has a completely different, viewpoint or whatever from us, and us not be our leadership not being negatively impacted by it. Because I kind of see that. Like let's go to an extreme. Let's say you're a Christian leader and you're leading someone who from the LGBT plus QZ whatever society, right? So how do you lead that person when your views are so contradictory to what they their lifestyle and who they are and everything like that? I kind of see that that's where these contradictions of, or conflicts of interest kind of could come into play into leadership with our opinions and the way we treat our team, etc. How should we lead someone that has a very, very, very different view than us?
Look, it really depends on what you're leading them to. I think there are many, many cases where a Christian can be working with people who don't hold to a biblical, Christ-centered worldview, but that's not really too relevant to the decision which is being made.
Yeah.
I think if you've got to make a decision on something which is dependent upon a person's view about the expression of human sexuality, then you're in a very different situation
Yes.
altogether. But I think in general, what I would say is don't be afraid to engage and seek to persuade. I think lazy leaders impose their view from the top. I think leaders who are authentic leaders with high levels of integrity, they know what their position is and they seek to persuade others while listening to different perspectives.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, sometimes a leader will have to make a decision that others don't agree with. That's what makes leadership lonely at times.
Yeah.
One other thing I would say too is that, look, if you're surrounded with a leadership team where members hold values that are very different to yours, you've probably made some big mistakes in setting up your leadership team.
Yeah.
So as a general rule, when you're establishing a leadership team, as best you can, you need to be choosing people whose values align with yours, because if not, their values will actually change the culture of your organisation. And I don't think that's what you want as a leader. So you want people in leadership positions, you want people on your team who are actually going to sustain the culture of your organisation, not undermine it.
Okay. So there's one thing that I kind of feel like saying about this is when we are leading someone that does have different views, I mean, look, at the bottom, as leaders, we need to remember that people are people, right? No matter what their views, no matter what their opinions, and we as leaders are responsible for the caring of those people, for the growth of those people, for, it's our responsibility to make sure that happens. So when we're leading someone, we should remove those viewpoints, our opinions about the person and their views, especially, like you said, especially if our outcome isn't driving towards anything to do with that, right? Obviously, if it is based on those things, then you've obviously hired the wrong person, and that's why we need to make sure we have aligned values and all those sorts of things. But, there's some leaders that actually don't have a choice with who they're working with because they may be middle management leaders and HR does the hiring and they're just given a team and you've got to lead them.
Oh, that happens. That happens.
So
that's where persuasion is so important. You've got to develop powers of persuasion, and that largely is words. It's the way in which you use words. You need to become good at crafting the English language. You need to become really good at putting your arguments together.
Yeah. That's good. And remembering that people are people. Like that's the thing. Now, how do we then lead them if we have differing viewpoints on something that's kind of irrelevant to what we're leading? Is understanding the purpose of what we're working towards. I think that's the key, is when you're leading someone that has different viewpoints or different culture or whatever, if you're leading them, find the common ground, which is usually the outcome or the project that you're working on. What's the purpose of that, and see how you can both integrate into that and focus on what brings you together and focus on leading them in that aspect rather than focusing on things that pull you apart, as long as those things are not mission critical. Hey, you just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you like that, hit the like button and put a comment below. Hey, if you want to watch more videos like this, check out our channel, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe.